Coming up on this special live election episode of Political Pulse, it's been a crazy campaign trail leading to tonight as polls just closed. Michelle Wu has been in the lead. Will that translate into a win tonight, or will there be an upset?
Anissa Essabi-George has been out on the campaign trail all day hoping for an upset. We'll be live at both headquarters tonight.
Hello and welcome to Political Pulse. On this special edition, we are looking at the end of the mayoral race and the campaign trails that brought us here. I'm Kerrigan Knowles.
And I'm Annie Bennett. Now let's take a look at how the candidates spent this election day.
Michelle Wu spent the day hopping from polling place to polling place around the city, encouraging residents to get out and vote. Midday, Wu walked around Chinatown, saying she was overjoyed to see the energy at the polls. Wu went live on Instagram while on her way to a campaign event, taking a moment to thank her staffers.
And I'm just so grateful for everyone who's been putting in the work.
She was later joined by Mayor Kim Janey at her Blue Hill Avenue headquarters, where the two spoke about how the importance of voting mattered. Wu faced questions from voters and discussed how she felt leading up to today.
Anissa Essabi-George has fallen in the polls leading up to Election Day. Molly Dougherty explained how Essabi-George is trying to close the gap.
Boston helped Anissa Essabi-George secure the second spot in the Boston mayoral election. Despite Michelle Wu's strong lead in tonight's election, according to recent Emerson polls, Essabi-George is relying on areas like South Boston and her union endorsements to close the gap. Essabi-George's no-nonsense campaign has attracted a strong following throughout Boston. Her endorsement lists big names, such as Massachusetts State Representative Kevin Honan and former Boston Police Commissioner William Gross. Topping those names, however, is the Massachusetts Nursing Association. The 23,000-member union says, just as MNA nurses and healthcare professionals have always been on the front lines of healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, Anissa has long dedicated herself to improving public health by elevating and meeting the social, environmental, and emotional needs of all Boston residents. Neighborhoods like South Boston played a key role in delivering a second-place primary victory to Anissa Essabi-George. Residents here eagerly shared their thoughts leading up to the election.
I'm a union member, so somebody who supports the union. I'm a bricklayer, local 3. Masonry, the electricians, bricklayer, all the different trades. Someone who supports the trades.
These groups have immense sway leading up to the election, but the ultimate decision comes down to voters tonight. From South Boston, I'm Molly Dougherty.
We have Faith Canal live at the Wu election party. What do you have for us, Faith?
Hi guys, I'm here right now. I'm Faith Pinot. I'm reporting live from the Boston Center for the Arts. We're here right now currently waiting for Michelle Wu. The results are about 9% in, with Wu currently leading above Essabi-George. We've been entertained all night. We have some lovely music going on behind me. We have more entertainment coming up as we wait for Wu to arrive around 9, and we'll make sure to keep you guys posted.
Thank you so much, Faith. Candidate Anissa Essabi-George was up and at the polls bright and early to cast her vote in this election. Wearing her signature pink coat, she greeted voters outside of the polling place. Later in the day, she met with her mom and Labor Secretary Marta Walsh's mom at a polling place in Dorchester as the mothers cast their own votes.
A recent Emerson poll has Michelle Wu winning this mayoral election by over 30 points. And this is one of the areas that helped her win in the primary. Of course, we can never know the true results until later tonight when the election results come in. But it will be exciting to find out.
In the primary election, Michelle Wu dominated in liberal-leaning precincts, including Chinatown, Allston-Brighton, Jamaica Plain, Beacon Hill, and the Back Bay, and the South End. Anissa Essabi-George, a Dorchester native, won with 49% of the vote in South Boston.
I think that they recognized a lot in her as someone who's from the area in particular, and probably thought that she might represent them.
Asabi George's base in South Boston and parts of Dorchester appeals to historically white conservative voters. Certain residents hope her Dorchester roots will allow the neighborhood to feel represented and heard within the city government.
I do understand that different areas of Boston have different interests, right? Do people want to drive in their cars, or do they want to live in a car-free society, right? That depends on what neighborhood you live in, what type of access to transportation you already have.
Voters living in different parts of Boston have varying opinions on what issue should be the future mayor's top priority in the first 100 days.
I live in the town that's not really, not as fancy as like South Boston or something, but I live in Dorchester, so food insecurities and like gun violence is like a big thing for my neighborhood, so her having that knowledge makes it a better reason I should vote for her when I get the chance.
A recent Emerson College poll showed voters who did not participate in the primary election were split between Asabi George and Wu, 42 to 46%. The remaining 12% remain undecided.
From Chinatown, I'm Ryan Nelson.
All right, our reporter Molly Dougherty is live at Anissa Asabi George's election headquarters now. What's happening, Molly?
I just spoke with Nicole Caravella, communications director for Team Anissa, just moments ago. She said numbers are looking encouraging. Efforts this weekend made by Team Anissa to close the gap between Anissa and opponent Michelle Wu had a far over expected turnout. This leads Caravella to believe it's going to be a long night watching results trickle in.
Attracting young voters has become a priority for Wu and Asabi George. Peyton Kavanaugh tells us more.
Youth involvement has skyrocketed for this year's mayoral election, and that has not gone unnoticed by the two mayoral candidates, Anissa Asabi George and Michelle Wu. This past Wednesday, we held a press conference for college journalists and college students alike, and today, the two candidates will be participating in a student forum at Boston University.
Students from varying colleges and universities attended the forum. I spoke with them about their involvement in this election and what it means to them.
Yeah, so my name is Panu Chan. I use the he/her pronouns. I'm the vice president for undergraduate student government. We've been involved with the Boston Intercollegiate Student Government for the past summer, and we've been working on trying to get the Boston mayoral candidates, same place, and trying to have a conversation with them. I am here personally just because I have a huge interest in learning about the ins and outs of Boston City Council and the Boston mayoral debates and how it is going forward.
My name is Jahan Ayesha, that's Juhan space AYESHA, and council. So for this one specifically, it's the Boston Intercollegiate Government, and I am the executive president of Emerson's student government, as well as one of two voting reps. So we were invited to be a part of this.
Seeing the elections here and how it's been panning out, have you seen an influx in youth involvement?
So actually, interestingly, this morning I was talking to Jim Hockey-Eisen of Campus 5, and he was giving me some statistics on the turnout for the presidential elections this past November. And at Emerson, we actually had a pretty good turnout. I think that 80-something% of people who registered, who were eligible to register, did register, and then 70% of that actually went and voted. I think part of that is because a lot of us had a stake in that presidential elections, whereas with the mayoral elections, it feels less so.
While some students feel like there is not enough youth involvement in the mayoral election, others are optimistic about the piqued interest in politics among their peers.
I would say there is considerably a lot of attention now, just the course of politics, with the previous election as well. I feel like people are more aware now about their rights and duties and why they need to vote and why they need to choose the right candidates. And I also feel like this is a very historic election because this is the first time there isn't a white man who's going to be the finalist at the Boston elections. And change is inevitable, and this I think one of the changes in the right direction.
There are 428,000 people registered to vote in Boston. But when the polls close at 8 today, Secretary of the Commonwealth William Galvin expects that 135,000 people will have voted. Polls opened at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. Around Boston, a low voter turnout is expected, despite this being a historical election for the city. 108,000 voters cast ballots in the preliminary elections in September, but Galvin's estimates is a 25% increase in voters. 142,000 people voted in the election for former Mayor Marty Walsh.
It's a historic night for the city of Boston, and polls just closed at 8 p.m. As you grab the New York Times reports that Michelle Wu has received over... Okay, sorry. Now we're going to go to Elena Nays for more on what the polls are saying about this year's mayoral election.
Thanks, Kerrigan. It is a historic night for Boston, and polls just closed at 8 p.m. The New York Times reports that Michelle Wu has received over 10,000 votes, which is 60.4% of the vote. As we wait for more results, I want to share a little bit about how the night might unfold. What we're getting right now does not include early voting or vote by mail or absentee ballots that were sent to City Hall later in the day. Those will be counted after the precincts have been reported back. This likely won't happen until after 10 p.m. tonight. As a reminder, early voting lasted from Saturday, October 23rd to Friday, October 29th. Reporters say that nearly 40,000 votes were already cast in early voting. And Secretary of State William Galvin said as of yesterday morning there was more than 40,000 mail-in ballots already sent in. This election is potentially one of the lowest turnouts in Boston history. So with those votes not coming in until later, we may be watching the polls for a while. That's what I have for you right now. Back to you.
Coming up after the break, we look back on the two candidates on their campaign trail and hear from the head of Emerson College Polling.
During high school, I hung with the wrong crowd and I never graduated.
I helped Santiago in many different ways, like all fathers do, because he always wanted to go to college.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually, once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
He was very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers. He connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
It was amazing to see him graduate. This was one thing that meant so much to him, and of course, it meant so much to us too.
With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed. That support is everything.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Julie was always a voracious reader. She'd carry 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Oh, look, a redhead.
Staring contest.
You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to WEBN.
Let's take a look at our candidates.
Councillor Anissa Isabi George faced off against opponent Michelle Wu Monday night in the 3rd mayoral debate. The debate served as Isabi George's final opportunity to appeal to undecided voters. She contested Wu's plans for a free MBTA system and rent control. She challenged Wu for her lack of understanding about the public health crisis in the Mass and Cass neighborhood of Boston. Acting Mayor Kim Janney recently declared drug addiction and homelessness a public health crisis in the neighborhood. City officials have started to remove the tent encampment in the intersection. If elected, Isabi George plans to allocate $30 million in federal funds to the crisis. She plans on appointing a high-level official to carry out the plans. Her plan focuses on addiction recovery, mental health treatment, and housing solutions for those in the neighborhood. Isabi George also reaffirmed her support for the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for city employees. She mentioned her plan to invest a significant amount of money to further help small businesses through the pandemic. Concerning housing, Isabi George criticized Wu's call for rent control, rather encouraging the elevation of first-time homebuyers. When asked if her husband's Boston real estate agency would create a conflict of interest, Asabi George promised he would conduct no new dealings in the city. A recent poll shows Asabi George has a lot of ground to make up. A recent Suffolk University Boston Mayoral poll showed Asabi George with 30% support compared to Wu's nearly 70%. Team Anissa for Boston will be hosting opportunities for canvassing, phone banking, and volunteering in the coming days before the election.
Let's take a look at our live reporter.
Now we go to Faith Pinal for more on the debates and what the road to election looked like for both candidates.
Rather, the party is designed to be a private night for Councillor Anissa Asabi George to spend time with close friends, family, and supporters. Nicole Caravella, Communications Director for Team Anissa, says the councillor will be taking the night to rest, for it has been a long day. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Molly. Now we're going to Faith Pinal for more on the debates and what the road to the election night looked like for both candidates.
Wu has been focused on driving up voter turnout after low numbers in last month's preliminary elections. At a kickoff event on Saturday at the Boston Public Library, Wu had the chance to connect with voters. She was joined in Back Bay at the early voting site by Senator Elizabeth Warren. An avid supporter of Wu, Warren echoed the campaign's calls for change. Early voting ends October 29th. Until then, the Wu team gears up for a week of door knocking as they hope to engage eligible voters. Following a weekend of campaigning, Wu hit the debate stage on Monday night. She squared up against opponent Anissa Asabi George. The two candidates focused their arguments around transportation and rent control. Wu continued her push for free public transportation. She also expanded on her plan to rebuild the Long Island Bridge. Asabi George disagreed with Wu's alternative ferry idea. However, both women are eager to solve the problem currently affecting Mass and Cass area. As the historic race comes to a finish, the latest polling shows Wu leading by 32 points.
Now we are going live to Faith, who is at the Wu election night party. Faith, what do you have for us?
Hi, Kerrigan and Annie. We are still here at the Wu election party, and it is bumping. Guests have been arriving here since 8 p.m., and they're still funneling in as we speak. We're waiting till the top of the hour when we're told Wu is supposed to arrive. Until then, people are dancing, people are mingling. There's a lot of fun activities happening here. And with the votes only 16% in, we know we have a long and entertaining night ahead of us. We'll make sure to keep you posted. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. Callie Crosden has more about housing rates in Boston and how the candidates feel about it.
A report by Zumper has shown that over the last month, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has increased by 5%. Redlining and exclusionary zoning practices have resulted in disproportionately high rates of housing instability in communities of color around Boston. Here, the difference in life expectancy in Back Bay is 30 years higher than it is in Roxbury.
As mayor, I'm committed to not just creating more affordability across our rental market, but also creating some real opportunities for home ownership, especially on the affordable end. Because we know for families, especially those that have been here for generations, they've only always been renters, and they've never owned sort of the land in which they live on. And we think about how that's rooted in our country's history, but in particular for our communities of color, we've got to create those pathways to ownership.
Wu has plans to use the city resources to find more affordability.
Boston is one of the wealthiest cities in the country, but one of the most unequal. The ability to have one person direct, I'm going to not let this happen there, or I'm going to only let this person do that there, has led to force in a strong mayor system, but it has exacerbated almost every inequity that we can describe.
Boston's next mayor will be tasked with addressing the increasing rents and homelessness as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. I'm Callie Croson for WEBN, reporting from downtown Boston.
Sydney Cohen has more about police reform and how the two candidates' views differentiate.
Defunding and reforming the police has been a hot topic in the recent mayoral election. Michelle Wu and Asabi George have different policies when it comes to this matter.
36-year-old mayoral candidate Michelle Wu is running neck and neck against opposing candidate Anissa Asabi George. The two candidates have very similar platforms as they are both Democrats, except for when it comes to public safety and the structure of the Boston Police Department. Wu plans on rebuilding the department. She feels that if the city invests in neighborhoods and is more strict on disciplining officers due to racially motivated misconduct, it could benefit the city of Boston.
I definitely think if reforming is very necessary, and putting funds towards different parts of it and putting police through more training than what has been in the past.
Wu believes that it's not entirely about the police officers, but rather the overall system, and that it is time for structural changes in order to dismantle systemic racism.
There's a clear choice in this race, and I'm fighting for the deep reforms around transparency and accountability that we need to have our crisis response reflect the need for public health and addressing mental illness separately from a response that involves armed law enforcement.
Wu envisions a future that diverts nonviolent 911 calls towards other essential services that will provide a better, more efficient system of protection instead of the police. Asabi George's supporters feel strongly about this issue and that rather than defunding the police, the government should increase funding to support and work alongside the city's officers.
Defunding the police does not make sense. You see, when you have problems in the department, you need more funding to educate the officers, etc., etc.
Although both candidates want a safer city for Boston residents, Asabi George wants to increase BPD financial support, whereas Wu wants to reallocate funds to restore justice into the system. Regardless of who is elected mayor, the Boston Police Department will face significant changes.
For WEBN, this is Sydney Cohen. Now we go to Amrit Panu and her interview with the head of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball.
So can you kind of explain how polling works?
The way survey research works is that we get the entire population and we reach into that population and talk to a sample of people. And from that sample of people, it represents the entire population. So we can take their information and extrapolate from 500 people the way 500,000 people are going to behave. And it's through that probability process of sampling that we can have representative samples and be able to project out some activities that people are going to behave in.
Does it change over like the amount of space that the polling is done over? Like for the US election, it's done over the entirety of the United States versus for Boston, it's just the city of Boston.
So if we think about sampling and sampling methods, if I was to go to a restaurant and try a bowl of soup, I don't need to drink the entire bowl of soup, even though if it was made in a giant cauldron of soup. Let's say it was 500 gallons of soup. I don't need to drink proportionately a certain sample size. I just need, a teaspoon and I can get a pretty good idea. And I can make a small bowl of soup and also get that idea. Well, when we look at population in universes in the United States, there's 300 million adults over 18, roughly, living in the United States. And yet my sampling methods work the same as if I was just sampling the city of Boston with a population of 600,000 people, or if I was just sampling a town or a district in an area. So generally speaking, once you hit 20,000 people, then your sampling methods all stay the same. And if we just think about on a simpler form, think about our COVID-19 vaccines. If you weigh 70 pounds or 250 pounds, you're still getting the same amount of the vaccine. So once we hit a certain threshold, and in sampling methods, it's a universe of 20,000 people, then the sampling methods stay the same, regardless if it's 200,000 people or 200 million.
And how have these election polls been reflected? How has the election the polls been reflected in the election so far? Sorry.
Well, it's always important that remember surveys and polls are painted with a broad stroke. We're not a precise instrument. So when you see a survey that says 55-45, it's not actually a 10-point spread, but it's a range of scores, and it needs to be interpreted based on that range of scores. And that way we don't have some of these election surprises that we've seen in the past couple of presidential years. And as long as we're looking at that, what we saw in the primary here in Boston kind of went exactly as the polling suggested. We had Michelle Wu was polling very strongly in the mid-30s. She ended up at around 33, 34%. It looked like Asabi George was going to get that second place finish because Janey and Campbell were battling for the minority vote, the black vote in some of Boston and they were splitting it. And so without one of them being the leader there, the polling kind of brought us to the reality of what was going to happen. The polling suggested that John Barros was going to do very poorly, and he did. So there's aspects of it that work. My biggest concern with polling is that people take it too precise, and it's there to show us trends. So, for example, in this current poll, we're seeing a trend as far as what's going to happen tonight. But what we shouldn't be trying to do is give you an exact score or exact vote, because that's not what a survey really can do.
And what are the trends showing for tonight?
I thought you might ask. So when we think about tonight, what we're seeing in the mayor's race is Michelle Wu, who won the primary by about 11 points. She's been able to extend her support, it looks like. She's in a very strong position. We have her up about 28 points, could be as high as 30. But remember, there's a range of scores, so it could also be as low as like 22, 23 points. Now, this polling was done prior to these last bits of ads that were released over the weekend. So it's important to see there was a lot of negative advertising coming out over the weekend, and that usually has an impact on attitudes. So these polls all happened prior to that. And prior to that, I would argue that Wu was in a very strong position to get elected. I still think she is in a very strong position. The question is just going to be by how much. So a poll, of course, runs with that margin of error. So there's a range of scores, and we have a 95% confidence level that it's going to fall within that range of scores. And so with all of that being said, we would expect to see Wu win by double digits tonight. That would be what the trends are suggesting.
Are there any particular districts she's stronger in than others?
Yeah, there's definitely regional support. So like South Boston, that's going to be a real strong area for Asabi George. But if we get into Alston, Brighton, that's going to be a really strong area for Michelle Wu. If we get into really Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Mission Hill, Mattapan, those should all be very strong areas for Wu. And when I say strong, she should be winning those like 75-25. You're going to get into some areas like Dorchester. That's going to be where Asabi George is able to make pretty much her last stand. Is going to be between Dorchester and West Roxbury. And we'll have to see if she's able to win those areas like 90-10. She's going to have to really dominate and have very strong turnouts in those two areas to be able to compete. With that said, she's trailing so badly in these other areas that it'll be interesting to see if there's sometimes like a wave that comes during an election. So even though that there's pockets where she's strong, when that wave comes, there's not much you can do about it. And we've seen that in like presidential years. If you remember 2016, that was like a wave where states that you thought Trump would win, he won by even more than you expected. That wave occurs on election day, and that's what we're waiting to see if we get that type of result.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Have a great day.
Coming up, next, more from our reporters on the candidates' views.
And the plans after inauguration. We'll be right back.
I helped Santiago in many different ways, like all fathers do, because he always wanted to go to college.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually, once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
He was very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers. He connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
It was amazing to see him graduate. This was one thing that meant so much to him, and of course, it meant so much to us too.
With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed. That support is everything.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Julie was always a voracious reader. She'd carry 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Oh, look, a redhead. Staring contest. You still got it. I know. Come alive with the forest. The dad was cute. You were looking right at us. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to this special episode of WEBN Political Pulse.
We're continuing with our live coverage of this year's Boston mayoral election.
Next, we go to live reporter Faith Pinal once again for an update on Michelle Wu.
Thanks again, Kerrigan and Annie. I am still here, and we are still going very strong at the party. Everybody says we should be expecting Wu to be out on the stage within 10 or 15 minutes, and we will keep you posted on everything that goes down here. Guests are expecting that she is going to be having an acceptance speech tonight, and we're already hearing cheers from all of the fans that are here. People are still filing in, so we'll see you soon. Back to you in the studio.
Anthony Labruto has more on the way this election's changing history with the first elected woman of color for mayor in Boston.
For the first time in its history, Boston will elect a woman of color to the mayor's office. This race has proven to be a historic one, with people across the city anxiously awaiting voting day.
For me, it's kind of a big change since it goes from many generations of men being mayors and to have actually two finalists being women. It's kind of iconic.
When asked why it was so important that Boston elects a more diverse group of people, Boston resident Alden Jones said,
"We'll give our children a chance to see some future and their hopes and dreams. That if somebody else can do it, then maybe I can do it, and we can all, and eventually there will be equality, hopefully."
Since 1822, when Boston officially created the mayor position, it has been held by white men. Kim Janey was Boston's first woman of color to hold the mayoral seat, and she replaced former mayor Marty Walsh. Regardless of who wins tonight, Wu or Asabi George will be Boston's first elected woman of color mayor. Aaron Oglenek, Emerson College professor and CEO of 27 South Strategies, shared with us why he thinks it's taken the city so long to break the precedent.
What we have is a city that is segregated by the way people live, and there are very tight voting patterns about who people are voting for. So what has happened, at least over the course of the last 20 or so years, is that there have been different candidates who come from different parts of the city with very strong bases, and candidates of color have sadly canceled each other out.
No matter tonight's results, the people of Boston are excited about this historic election and history-breaking candidates. I'm Anthony Labruto, reporting for WEBN.
Mayor Kim Janey has made history as the first Black and first woman to serve in the acting mayor position. As the city prepares to elect a new mayor, we reflect on Kim Janey's accomplishments over the past 7 months. In October, Janey unveiled a plan to address the mass incarceration situation and declared substance use disorder and unsheltered homelessness a public health crisis. She issued an executive order to create a central coordinating team of city and state partners to find shelter and treatment options. The coordinating team met the morning she spoke about this new plan. Janey also declared every second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day through an executive order she signed early last month. The mayor notes the city of Boston is committed to recognizing Indigenous history, celebrating cultures, strengthening relationships, and increasing dialogue with local tribes. Now an update from live reporter Molly Dougherty.
Nisa Sabi George hit the polls early this morning with her children. She wouldn't let her kids be late to school. As the day progressed, Asabi George visited multiple polling locations throughout Boston. She spoke with voters and supporters. While Asabi George has yet to enter the party, close friends, family members, and supporters have been filtering in as the polls close and as the results come rolling in. Back to you in the studio.
Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts is provided free bike rides on Election Day in order to make voting more accessible. Free bike rides will be available in 11 cities of the Boston metropolitan area, including Boston, Cambridge, Newton, and Somerville. Voters can also find the closest polling location through the Blue Bikes app. Jeff Bellows, Vice President of Corporate Citizenship and Public Affairs at Blue Cross, said that they're proud of removing transportation barriers and helping citizens exercise their right to vote. Now we go back to Elena Nays in the M Suite.
Thanks, Kerrigan. Approximately 16% of precincts are reporting results right now, and Wu is leading with about 4,000 votes. That means she's leading with 58.4% of the votes. We'll see if more votes come in from South Boston, where Asabi George is from, and see if she can shrink that gap. As a reminder, this does not reflect the early voting numbers and mail-in ballots, which will be counted later after all the precincts come in. We only have around 20,000 votes counted so far, so we still have a long way to go. Asabi George has yet to concede, but if she does, we will keep you updated. That's what I have for you. Back to you at the desk.
The two mayoral candidates, Michelle Wu and Anissa Asabi George, met with acting Mayor Kim Janey to discuss when the transfer of power would take place. They all agreed that the next mayor of Boston will be inaugurated on November 16th, only 2 weeks after Election Day. This time period is considerably shorter than the period of transition between previous administrations. After Election Day, each candidate has 10 days to request a recount, and election results cannot be certified during this period. But if none of the candidates request a recount, the results should be certified 1 day before the winner is inaugurated.
Now we're going to break. Thank you for joining us, and we will be right back.
During high school, I hung with the wrong crowd, and I never graduated.
I helped Santiago in many different ways, like all fathers do, because he always wanted to go to college.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually, once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
He was very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers, he connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
It was amazing to see him graduate. This was one thing that meant so much to him, and of course, it meant so much to us too.
With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed. That support is everything.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Julie was always a voracious reader. She'd carry 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Oh, look, a redhead. Staring contest. You still got it. I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back. Results are coming in quickly. Let's check in with Elena, who is watching the numbers.
Thanks. So we're still sitting at Wu with a 58.4% lead. The polls haven't really been updated in about 20 minutes. We haven't seen any new data coming in. But as we're following through the night, we will keep coming back to this, and we will keep coming back. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Wu spent the day campaigning with her family. She visited several polling places and used social media to let people know where she was. Wu has been leading in the polls for several weeks and hopes to head to the corner office. Let's head over to Faith, who is at the campaign party. Faith, how is the mood?
All right, guys, we are over here still at the campaign party. The party is not cooling down anytime soon, and with nearly 16% of the votes being tallied so far, according to the New York Times poll, we have Wu in the lead right now. Spirits are very high, and they continue to be up. People are anxiously awaiting. We haven't heard any word of Wu being in the building yet, but we are sure she's going to come. As you guys know, she has had a busy day canvassing and campaigning. Her work is not done, and she worked up until the very last second that the polls closed. So right now, we're sure she's getting some well-deserved rest before she comes here to get what everybody's anticipating is going to be an acceptance speech. We'll continue to keep you guys posted. It might be a long night, and we will be here every step of the way. Back to you, Kerrigan and Annie, in the studio.
Thank you, Faith. It sure looks crowded there. There is some speculation Wu could take the stage soon, and we'll be waiting for that. But for right now, let's check in with Molly at Anissa Asabi George's headquarters.
There's a sea of pink behind me as more and more Anissa Asabi George supporters, friends, and family members come rolling in. Asabi George has yet to arrive, but supporters will continue to eat, drink, listen to music, delivery, and discuss as results come rolling in. Back to you in the studio.
Boston will have a new mayor. After waiting for the votes to be counted, Michelle Wu is now declaring victory. Let's hear what she has to say.
And today, together, we are marching into Boston's promise.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Political Pulse.
It was an exciting night of political coverage. Make sure you tune in to Inauguration Day 2 weeks from today. Thank you for watching WEBN News. I'm Kerrigan Knowles.
And I'm Andy Bennett. Please check out our Facebook page at WEBN.